Hey, friends. So today we're going to talk about the astrological zodiac and what it can teach us about the political spectrum and the current political divide. And I'm going to share with you the perspective that, from an astrological perspective, where we want to aim for politically is really the center. And holding a philosophy or ideology that's anywhere off center is not in alignment with the essential wisdom that comes through in understanding the zodiac. So let's get into it. We've all seen probably the political spectrum map that shows four poles. You can take quizzes. It's like, where do you fall on this pole between, left, right, and then authoritarian, libertarian? Where do you fall? And it's really just commonly understood that, um, you know, you have certain ideas, certain beliefs, and then you identify with being somewhere on the spectrum. I am a left winger, I am a right winger. And when we apply the astrological lens to that, it's really hard to understand how that actually makes sense. Um, so let me explain what I mean. So instead of thinking about left and right, authoritarian, libertarian is just like random ideas, I think it's helpful to think about them as like essential polarities of human consciousness that are timeless. Like these aren't just things made up by political parties or that um, we're using historical data to like build these as coherent philosophies. No, these are essential poles of consciousness. So looking at the left and right, first we have the right, or the conservative polarity, which is embodied by like Saturn energy astrologically. And its job is to preserve what's working over time. Because if we don't put any conscious energy into preserving what works and what we care about and what we value, it's going to be eroded over time. That's just the reality of things. And so there is an essential nature and an essential part of human consciousness that says, let's figure out what works, hold on to it, and sustain it. So we could see that as connected with Vishnu, the great sustainer energy of the universe. Then on the flip side of that polarity, we have progressivism, which is the energy of change and moving forward. And it understands that if we're not consciously always seeking to move forward and assess what's wrong with the current system and see how we can improve it and break out of the stagnation and limitation that the current system holds, then we're going to stagnate and we're going to suffer. And the system will eventually collapse inward on itself because it needs innovation, it needs movement, and it needs change. So you have these two essential poles of consciousness, and these apply to how we live our own lives as well as how we collectively like operate society. Then in political terms, what we think of as like authoritarian, libertarian, we can relate that as like self and other, because remember, authoritarianism, it's not people trying to oppress us. Like it's not about you as an individual. Like any laws that are passed that are called authoritarian, whether we disagree or disagree, the focus is not we are wanting to oppress you as an individual. No, the focus is we have an interest for the collective, and we believe that sacrificing a personal freedom here is more important. So that's what the authoritarian perspective says. It's in service to the collective. It's about making the environment a safer place where well-being is maximized for more people. And the libertarian perspective, representing individuality and autonomy, is the reverse pole. And these polarities have to constantly be in tension with one another, because if either one of them dissolves and one of them completely wins, then existence as we know it just like collapses. Like we have to hold both polarities. The self and other polarity is symbolized by Aries, Libra. In astrology, we think of Aries, self focus, Libra, relational, other focused. We need to have both polarities. Both of these are essential. Okay, so we could make a whole video on just really dissecting that and these different polarities, how they relate to different astrological realms. But I just want to paint the picture of these are essential forces in human consciousness. Now, imagine how silly it would be if people took their personal charts, um, astrologically speaking, and made ideologies out of them and said, I am a Aquariusist, or I'm a Taurusist, or a Leoist, or whatever. If we made isms out of them, because when you make an ism out of it, you're basically saying this set of values is the most important. Like this is the guiding set of values. We don't do that with astrology because we understand no sign is superior to the other. Like there's different, we move through cycles. And so there are times where certain archetypes and energies are going to have dominance over others. And that's just the season that we're in at the time. But ultimately, we don't identify with any one of these astrological archetypes and say, I am a fill in the blankist, because we understand as astrologers that this makes up a map of human consciousness with all of the essential polarities that are working, that these tensions are what hold the universe together. And where we're striving to be, if astrology has an ideology, it's the 13th sign. And where's the 13th sign? It's in the center of the wheel, because the center of the wheel is what's most true. It's your true identity. Your true identity is not your sun sign or your moon sign or your Mercury sign. These are aspects of your consciousness that you can identify. If you can identify and reflect about them, then they must not be you. Who are you? You're the witness, your consciousness, and you are at the center of the wheel. And that pure consciousness, that perspective of the witness, that's the only thing that should be ultimately elevated in terms of an ideology with astrology. It's about being precisely in the center of the wheel as the witness, and honoring and allowing the full spectrum of the human psyche and all of the essential poles. And like the only ideological commitment is to the center, keeping it all in balance, because that's the whole wheel of creation and what keeps this going. Um, if you were to, if astrologers were to faction off into, different ideological factions of arguing about, no, Taurian values are more important than Aquarian values, like we can just see how that would be ridiculous. So, and I make that comparison just to illustrate that point of like, if you, once you start to look at the political spectrum in that way, it kind of looks equally ridiculous. What makes total sense is temperament, because just like we all have different astrological temperaments, we all have different social and political temperaments. And that's what our political ideologies are mostly made up of, is we take how we personally perceive the world and how we feel and how we'd like things to be and what our personal value system is that feels most important to us temperamentally. And then we elevate that and we say, that's what I believe. That's how the world should be, because that's how I feel. I mean, there's a lot of research on this, that you can look at the big 5 personality traits and they're highly correlated to where people fall on the personality spectrum, looking at, or excuse me, the political spectrum. So looking at conscientiousness, openness, agreeableness, the basic personality traits, you can predict with pretty high accuracy where people are going to fall on the political spectrum, which shows you that people are not creating political ideologies from a, I want to detach from my personal temperament and look at the whole. No, they're creating ideologies from their personal temperaments. Like their personal temperament is more conservative or it's more progressive. And then they turn that into an ideology and judge other people that don't share that same temperament that they've turned into an ideology. Ultimately, these are all essential poles. And it makes sense that we're going to have people that are of different temperaments to articulate the different poles. So we have some people that are temperamentally very individualistic, very focused on freedom, personal freedom and autonomy, and they're very sensitive to being controlled. Well, for those that don't have that temperament, we could actually look at them, those people, as gifts to the collective. Like, okay, they're the voice that's voicing that because that's their temperament. If I'm over here on this other end of the spectrum, I don't feel that as much. So I have to listen to those people. to really hear that perspective and integrate it and value it. For people that are temperamentally very inclined to make personal sacrifices for the whole, you know, they're going to be able to articulate that perspective. So we're with people that don't have that temperament, we could listen and integrate what they have to say in the same way that we do with astrology. We take in all of these different archetypes that make up the map of the totality of consciousness, and we don't elevate any one above the other ultimately, because it's all ultimately part of the whole. And you know, we can take an even bigger step back and say, okay, there's going to be people that do identify with these ideologies, that do transfer their personal temperament into an ideology. And like, okay, so I could be in resistance to that and say that's wrong, or I can just say, okay, that's part of the whole too. Like we're gonna have people that are really animated and really identified with one of these polarities. And instead of criticizing them for that, I could step back and say, well, maybe they're actually playing an essential role to balance out the people over here on this polarity. So all four of these polarities, they're essential polarities. Any enlightened society is going to take all four into account and is going to strive for a perfect center balance of all the poles, just like an enlightened astrological viewpoint is going to look toward the center. How can we take the naturally take our existing temperament or the factors in an individual chart, and how can we utilize that to break through, get to the center? So love to know what you think. Thanks for tuning in, and peace out.